Hotep, and welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel Leader, one of the co-founder members of 100 Blacks Law Enforcement Care. I'm here once again with my co-host, Michael Greys, aka Big Mike.
Namaste. Good to be with you today, brother.
Likewise, brother, and it's good to welcome our viewing audience to another edition of Community Cop. This is where truth and real talk occurs. We have so much to talk about, so as customary, let us rush into our historical piece. We have quite a few incidents that occurred in the month of August. First of all, some of you may remember the NYPD assault in Brooklyn of Abner, Louima, which occurred on 8/9, I believe, 1997. Michael, why don't you remind our viewing audience of that horrific assault?
Yes, just want to say with respect to time that at that time, when Abner Louima was assaulted, we're talking about a time where you had to choose, was he telling the truth? Was this Giuliani time? Was there a shift in police tactics? Or was it a simple case that this was something that went awry? Was this an act of a gay club? Or did these horrific things that happened to him really have happened at the hands of a police officer? And it took time, but we found out in due course that it was actually police officers in a police station that did these things to Abner Louima.
And we're talking about, for those who may not know, or we're talking about a sodomy which occurred in the bathroom of a police precinct. Abner Louima was arrested by an Officer Volpe and 3 other officers, and he sustained numerous serious injuries as a result of them forcing a nightstick or broomstick up his rectum, which ripped certain internal body parts of his and caused some serious injury. As Michael said, initially a lot of the officers attempted to suggest that he did it to himself, but it found out that these were indeed police officers and it occurred inside a police officer. It occurred inside of a police precinct. So yeah, that
the 7-0.
Right, the 7-0. Ultimately, the primary officer and the other officers were convicted, and Officer Volpe remains in the jail as we speak. All right, then on August 9th, 2014, we have the Michael Brown.
Well, certainly we should remember that it didn't happen too long ago, 2014. You had Michael Brown walking down the street, and one thing led to another, and police officer Darren Wilson savagely killed him right out there and left his body for well over 3 hours laying there in the street. And that incensed that Ferguson crowd, the residents, who was fed up already. All it needed was a spark, and there was an explosion where we saw the real strength and true character of people that were sick and tired of being sick and tired. They were fed up. And I just saw some of the strongest individuals that I've ever seen in my life stand up for justice for Michael Brown, whether they knew him or not, whether they liked him or not, whether they was family or not. I saw a united community calling for justice. And then I saw national leaders actually trying to tear down what they built by saying they were unfocused, they were unleaderless. But this was the strength and character of African people fighting for justice, demanding it, and nothing short of justice.
And on a side note to that particular story, and unfortunately, many of those leaders of that particular movement were found murdered. A number of them,
yes,
a high number of the leaders of that particular movement have since been murdered, and there's been no follow-up investigation on whether or not there's a connection or conspiracy to murder individuals who organized this particular community response to police criminality. Of course, there's the Watts Rebellion, which occurred on August 11th, 1965.
Yeah, just briefly, the Watts riot, it needs to be studied and looked at, but I'll just say it just started from an everyday traffic stop where allegedly the driver failed a test to find out whether he was inebriated or not, and his mother was there, and one thing led to another, words led to action, and in the action, he was beat down, the driver was beat down, and they assaulted his mother. And at that point, things spread like wildfire, and it was on, and of course, National Guard was called in, police agencies from all over California, outside of Watts, all came in, National Guard, and one thing led to another. But again, that was the beginning of another level of revolutionary activity, as opposed to what you would traditionally see in the civil rights movement. This was action where Black men were standing up for other Black men and women, and that was the Watts Rebellion.
All right. Then we have on August 14th, 1906, the Brownsville incident.
Yeah, we should not forget that, because it actually ill-affected the 25th Infantry. And at that time, if you don't know, that all Black soldiers were in Black regiments. And this regiment was legendary, the 25th, that was stationed in Brownsville, Texas. Those were actually among the group that had did not only were outstanding during the Civil War, but the 25th Infantry was one of the groups that went to Texas to free people, what we call Juneteenth. So that was a legendary group of men, and they were ultimately charged with the murder of a bartender and a police officer. Actually got into a discrepancy that went outside of the bar, and the police officer shot him. He shot the cop, and the cop shot him, but they blamed it on the 25th Infantry. And one thing led to another. It went to, and actually, it went to the President of the United States. And so over 167 police officers, soldiers in the Army was actually dismissed, and they were disbarred from any type of federal employment after their days as a soldier. And that went on for over 60 plus years until President Nixon vacated that and gave them the honors that they deserved. But all of them, for the most part, were all dead by then. But in retrospect, white people cleaning up other white people's mess by saying no, after they looked closely at the paperwork, all of them were accounted for at the time of that shooting, the police officer and the bartender. They were there on the base. This was just another incident where they just blamed it on Black people, and Black people paid the price again for white people's treachery.
All right, and the last issue is the Springfield riots, which occurred at 8/15/1908.
Yes, we've covered this many times, and I'll just say that was the start of what later became the NAACP, when individuals saw Black people being hung and killed and shot at the street of Illinois. It was just so cold and callous. They called it a race riot. But if you look very closely at all these race riots, it was white people killing Black people in massacres. So this was another massacre that had occurred, and the NAACP went up to the Niagara movement, white people, Covington, Villard, and others, Mary White, and them, they went up to the Niagara movement, where the most prominent Blacks in the country were at that time meeting, and they were able to, with their money, convince them to start another civil rights organization, and it morphed into, indirectly, it morphed into what's now commonly known as the NAACP. So it didn't start in Niagara, that started in Illinois because of a white race riot.
And what happens, the common thread or theme with all of these so-called riots, race riots, is that there a lot of times when a wild mob when there was complicity with law enforcement, there was complicity with local elected officials, with the clergy, with the officials, of those particular areas. I don't care what state we're talking about. So this
Illinois.
happened, right? So this happened all over the country, and all of these instances, there was complicity by elected officials and by law enforcement, prosecutors, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just a random mob of individuals. These were individuals who were supposed to had a responsibility to establish and maintain law and order. So thank you for those particular stories. And did you want to make any more comments as it relates to our history piece?
No, I'll just say that was Springfield, Illinois, and most people think it started upstate New York in Niagara, the NAACP, but actually the motivating factor was in Springfield, Illinois. And for those history buffs out there that want to know, obviously that's the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln. So, that's home turf for him. So, and that's where quite a few people, including President Obama, launched his presidential campaign. And others, did that too, with respect to President Abraham Lincoln.
All right, fast forward to some contemporary news stories. Last week, many of you may have learned or heard that U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland has brought charges against 4 police officers involved in the Breonna Taylor murder. Officer Joshua James, Kelly Goodlett, Brett Hankerson, and Sergeant Kyle Meany were 4 officers involved with the actual shooting, and they've been charged with falsifying information, unlawful search and seizures, and violating the rights of Sister Breonna Taylor, because as we stated here on Community Cop, when this incident first occurred, they lied on the application to the judge for a no-knock warrant. The Inspector General for the local post office came forward publicly and stated he never told those officers that they had delivered drugs at Breonna Taylor's apartment. The officers told the judge when they applied for the no-knock warrant that the Inspector General did tell them that. So they were caught lying. And now they're going to hopefully have to deal with the circumstances. I think this is a smack in the face to the Kentucky Attorney General, Daniel Cameron. For those who remember when he gave his press conference explaining why he chose to bring charges against only 1 police officer, he stated he wasn't going to look into the issue of the no-knock warrant, the application, because he knew the officers lied and he should have pressed charges. But in order to try to give cover to these police officers, he opened up his statement when he announced, made his decision known at the press conference that he wasn't going to bring charge against these officers. So this shows complicity with the Kentucky Attorney General. I think the residents of Kentucky should recall him because this was a national case or an international case, and his lack of, protecting the residents of Kentucky, in particular Breonna Taylor, shows that he doesn't deserve to be that, to hold that particular office. It's malfeasance on his end, and for him not to press these charges on these officers when that's, he said in his press conference that he was going to leave that up to the federal government, federal prosecutor, to look into the issue of the search warrant. When if the officers lied on this warrant, those are state charges, perjury. He could have easily prosecuted those police officers, but he chose not to. And clearly it was to give cover. I haven't heard from him yet as his explanation as to why was the U.S. Attorney General able to bring these charges up and discover these officers' malfeasance, and he wasn't able to. It's a smack in the face, and I'm still waiting for him to give an explanation. And also, Michael, we talked about a Black police officer named Gerald Goins, who was a Houston police officer who lied on his application on the search warrant, where 2 white drug dealers were killed. Similarly, as the police officers came into the apartment, they fired back. They didn't know it was police officers. Police officer wound up killing them. When the dust settled, the prosecutors learned that Officer Gaines had lied on his application to the judge on his no-knock search warrant. And because he perjured himself on the warrant and individuals died as officers tried to enter the apartment, this officer is charged with murder. So we said back then, and we continue to say now, these 4 officers should be charged with murder as well. And just, so what are your feelings? I know I said a whole lot, but what are your feelings as it relates to not only the Kentucky Attorney General, Daniel Cameron's decision not to look into the issue of search warrant, and the decision of the U.S. Attorney, Merrick Garland, to hold these 4 officers accountable?
Well, from the outset, want to first commend Julian Harper for his legal expertise on this matter, where he was able to break down so much of that case. Now, Noel was somewhat of a pit bull and a bloodhound with respect to what Kentucky Attorney General Cameron was doing, because you stayed on it for weeks and kept pointing out the inconsistencies of the very cover-up that's all coming out now. You and Julian were very strong on this, and you in particular pointed out how dismissive he was with respect to the warrant aspect of it. And he tried to act like he had to overlook it. At that time, obviously, him and his white wife has a relationship with McConnell, the minority leader of the Senate, of the US Senate, McConnell. And he was looking forward to some type of appointment, possibly from, at that time, President Donald Trump. So between Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, he was looking for either some type of endorsement or an appointment or a combination of both. He was looking forward to, so he was going along with the system and overlooking things that you just can't overlook, because the facts was right there in front of him. But he showed himself to be a true race traitor. He showed himself to be a coward, a very shallow man in that process. And I'm so glad that you was able to unwrap and peel back the facts of the case with you, as well as Julian, your legal expertise. And so we are redeemed. Community cop, family, 100 Blacks in law enforcement, that if to any of those who might have criticized us, we are now redeemed, because now the federal government is saying that 100 Blacks in law enforcement was right.
Facts.
They're saying that you and Julian was right, and that Cameron, Attorney General Cameron, was wrong.
Facts.
So the US Attorney General is redeeming you and Julian, saying that you both were right.
And I think the citizens of Kentucky should ask Cameron, why did he not see this malfeasance on the behalf of these police officers? I mean, the information was right in front of him. Why did he not charge them with state charges as it relates to, them falsifying information as it relates to the judge in order to get that no-knock warrant? So I think the citizens of Kentucky should force him, because if you remember, Michael, after he claims that the grand jury refused to prosecute the police officers, members of the grand jury came public and said, listen, we didn't indict these police officers because he never came up with no charges. So he attempted, because the grand jury is a closed section, not open to the public, he attempted to hoodwink the public into believing that the grand jury was the ones who decided not to prosecute these police officers. When members of the grand jury came forward and said it was him, he made no presentation to the grand jury as it relates to criminal charges. So on numerous instances, we see this race traitor, this Kentucky Attorney General, not live up to his responsibility as it relates to protecting the rights of someone who died, which is our sister Breonna Taylor, an attempt to, not prosecute these police officers and do everything in his power not to look at the information that was in front of him that would have gave him an indictment, just as the U.S. Attorney General was able to give. So it's incumbent on the residents of Kentucky to hold him accountable for his action, because this is, in my humble opinion, is corruption at the highest level.
Well, I am certain, put it this way. He only charged the police officer that shot rounds into the other apartment.
Facts.
So you're talking about several police officers shooting rounds, killing Breonna Taylor, wounding her fiance, but the only one that was charged was the police officer whose errant shots went into a neighboring apartment. So he never charged a police officer that killed Breonna Taylor. Can you imagine in this situation, he somehow does not charge the very people that killed Breonna Taylor? And when you go into the grand jury and you're talking about the weather or how well the Yankees are doing, and you don't bring the information, then the grand jury is held captive. If you don't bring this to them and ask them their thoughts so they can come back with an indictment against those other police officers. So he never made the police officer that killed Breonna Taylor an issue, or the ones who also wounded her fiance. That was never a part of the process. So when he said they didn't return a true bill, well, he didn't present what would be a true bill, so they didn't return what would be a true bill and indict those officers. He showed himself to be a traitor of the Black race, the highest order. You can't think of a living or dead traitor any worse than Attorney General Cameron. And he's not much of a man either, by the way.
Right. And when you have someone at that high level, an Attorney General obviously show some favoritism in his decision not to prosecute these police officers. That's corruption at the highest level. So it's incumbent on the residents of Kentucky to really make an issue out of this. The federal government not only found out the officers lied as it relates to the warrant application, but they knew that they lied. It wasn't an accident. It's not like they presented false information accidentally. They lied. They were told that the post office never delivered drugs to that apartment,
right? And
they with it. So there was just a high level of corruption that the U.S. Government Attorney General decided he had to press charges. But once again, it's incumbent on the residents of Kentucky to hold their Attorney General accountable for malfeasance and his decision not to prosecute these police officers, because you cannot have the highest prosecutor in your state make a decision not to prosecute police officers when the information and the evidence is right in front of him, and he just decided not to get it, to just overlook it and move on to other issues. So we'll see if he's ever held accountable.
Yes, sir.
Okay, our second story is something that occurred for months. Basketball player Brittney Griner was recently convicted for her drug possession charge and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Many are outraged and see this as a very stiff sentence. Many are outraged because they feel that the United States government is not doing all they can do to get her out of prison. Many cannot imagine her spending that long period of time in prison, and are criticizing Russia for such a high prison sentence for what some consider a small amount of drugs. Michael, a lot of people take issue with this 9-year prison sentence, and I think it's also a high number, extremely high number of years. But to criticize Russia for these draconian sentences, which was a foreign country, when we've had similar instances and similar sentences, not only had, but continue to have right here in the state. President Biden was architecture of the crime bill that had some of the most draconian prison sentences for minor amounts of drugs right here in the United States. Americans and many African Americans and many Latinos and many poor individuals are still languishing in prison today as a result of some of those draconian sentences. But first, your response to Sister Griner's receiving 9 years, and then comment on the latter point.
Well, I would say that to have cannabis oil or hashish oil, whatever you want to call it, it might not mean a lot to America today because of the light sentencing now given to marijuana or any of its derivatives. However, we're talking about Russia here. Russia has laws like China has laws, like Turkey or any other country has laws. So for America to characterize her detainment as unlawful is not true. She broke the law. Now, they were calling it unlawful until she admitted it, and they're still calling it unlawful, her detainment. They're saying that her sentence was high. Did these same people say the sentence was high when a Black man in Plains, Georgia had did 30-something years for allegedly stealing a chicken, and that's the hometown of Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter? Have they said that in cases where Black men and women were killed unjustifiably and the police officers got off scot-free? Have they said that in places like Minnesota where no police officer was ever charged with all these various murders that went down, but when a Black cop by way of Africa, I think he was from Somalia somewhere, he shot a white woman. He reached over his partner who he thought was being shot at by her. He thought she was aiming a gun at him, and he shot and killed her. Now he was charged, but no other white officer before. As heavy-handed as they are in Minnesota, nothing happened before, but they didn't question that. So now you question Brittney Griner's case. Well, what about convict leasing? What about convict leasing? That went off from the day slavery ended in 1865, and it went on all through the 1800s into the 1930s. The first president that ever even mildly addressed it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So look at all of those presidents from 1865 through the 1930s that ignored convict leasing, that went on in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama. It went through the entire Confederacy, where they was picking up children as young as 8, 9 years old, teenagers, 13, 14, grown men, 20 years old. They used either vagrancy laws that you didn't have a job at the time and nobody spoke up for you, or they just charged you with something. Corporations used to go to sheriffs and say, this is going to be a heavy summer. We need 100, we need 150 Blacks. The sheriffs say, I'll have them delivered to you in a few weeks. And they in turn would do their so-called due diligence and deliver 150, 200 in any particular town. So Black men were charged ad nauseum for the pettiest things in the world and did 5, 10, 15, 20 years of hard labor till they died. Many died there. You know, that's why people like Sam Cooke made that song, The Chain Gang. Been working on the chain thing for so long, sang it beautifully, because when you grow up in those areas and you have relatives that tell you those stories about the chain gang. So Sam Cooke sang that song, and so many of us had that experience by relatives who told us about the convict leasing system that went on for decades and decades and decades. So I always say, well, who's gonna cry for us? So now gay organizations are making a big thing about somebody that broke the law in a foreign land, but they ignore what happens to Black men and women every day here. But because she is a basketball player and a Black lesbian, and they're trying to make gay the new Black. So they're in a strange way trying to look like they're being isolated and they're being terrorized, but actually she broke the law in a foreign land, and so she's under the jurisdiction of the laws of that land.
And, you know, I thank you, Michael, for showing the history of the duplicity and prosecution and sentences that exist in the country, because I mean, it's so hypocritical for me to listen to your CNNs, your CBS, your WPIXs, and your ABCs overtly critical of Russia. And I, for one, believe that, you know, although this is a different country, that is a very stiff sentence, but America has a history of over-sentencing African Americans for some of the most trivial crimes. As I stated, Joe Biden was proud to be the sponsor of the crime bill, where so many indigent people were given long, draconian, unfair prison sentences, sometimes for some of the minor offenses, nonviolent offenses. Vice President Harris, when she was the prosecutor in Los Angeles, you know, she prosecuted
yeah, I think San Francisco, I think.
She prosecuted mothers, and she was proud of it, whose children played hooky. You know,
that's right.
So, you know, as individuals from this country point to Russia to criticize them for their such harsh sentences, what some people consider to be unfair sentences, the United States, as you pointed out, has a long history of doing that to African American males and females. And so it's you know, it's that old story when you watch out when you point your finger at somebody because you had three pointed at you. You know, America is you know, probably one of the last governments that should be that critical when unfair sentences, extremely harsh sentences are happening every day in 2022 right here in the United States of America.
Yes, sir.
We'll keep apprised. You know, presently, of course, the Russian government, the United States government is supposed to be having conversations in terms of doing some trade of prisoners. We'll see if that ever comes into fruition and our sister is ultimately allowed to return home. All right, there's an incident, Michael, that happened in Wisconsin where a Wisconsin white man assaulted a Black woman. His name was Stephen Husk, and he assaulted Natasha, Sister Natasha. Why don't you tell our audience about that particular story?
Yes, this Sister Natasha Fuller was walking from work, casually listening to music in her AirPods, and she walked down an alley, an open or wide alley, and in that process, Stephen Husk drove behind her in a truck. She didn't hear the truck behind her. When he blew his horn, she immediately stepped to the side. He drove in front of her, steered the car and blocked off her from walking, jumped out of the car and asked her, why was she walking in the middle of an alley? As soon as he jumped out in a menacing fashion, she stepped into action by pulling out her phone and she hit record very quickly. I want to commend her. She's just 22 years old, but she had the mindset to understand this might get ugly. She hit the record button. So he tried to take the phone from her because when he screamed on her, what are you doing walking in the middle of an alley? And she stepped to the side, but she hit the record button. He tried to take the phone from her. And when she pulled back her hand so he couldn't take the phone, he snatched about the braids in her hair, threw her to the ground, and started punching her all in the face. He almost knocked her cold. She was concussed, and he took her phone and he walked it back to his truck and put the phone in the truck. And at that point, she wasn't out cold. She got up and tried to retrieve her phone, and he beat her down again. Now, when the police came, he told the police that, well, I did what I did because I was afraid of having my picture on the internet, and she was recording. So he was, at that point, he was charged with a misdemeanor. He had a misdemeanor charge. He had a misdemeanor charge for battery and disorderly conduct, robbery with use of force. That's what he was charged with. he beat her down twice and took her phone. So that's all he was charged with. And the police immediately wrote their report saying that this was not a racial incident. Now, I don't know how they determined that, other than they said that at no time, even according to Fuller, the sister, did he use a racial slur. So they said it wasn't a racial incident because when he beat her down, he did not utter a racial slur. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you know, when you go over the points of this particular crime, you know, I don't know why they charged him with a misdemeanor assault, especially if you stated that she received a concussion. You know, that at minimum assault too. You know, serious physical injury, because anytime you get a concussion, you know, you can have permanent damage. You know, these tribute. Hopefully, they upgraded the charges. And I know you said robbery. That's what I was waiting to hear. You know, by him taking the phone and him assaulting her when she tried to retrieve her phone, that's a robbery right there. And so I'm hoping that they decide to prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law and not attempt to trivialize what his sister experienced. Because this, you know, when you look at the incident as you described it, these are very serious charges he should be facing. You know, felony assault, felony robbery, and as well as additional charges. So, you know, I'm pretty sure we'll update our family on the prosecution of this individual, if he is prosecuted, you know, and not offered a plea deal. But these are very serious felony charges, and he should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
And just want to commend the quick thinking of Sister Fuller for putting on that, you know, record immediately in her phone. She didn't have to fumble. She went right to it right away, which was quick thinking.
Right, because without the, you know, the video, the coverage of the phone, you know, it would have been perhaps her story against his story.
Right.
A lot of the police officers, you know, we know which side of the fence, regardless of whether or not she had injuries, you know, many times which side of the fence they fall on when they hear, you know, two individuals' stories.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yes, sir.
There was two horrific incidents as it relates to police officers. First, real quick, a Mississippi police chief, mind you, named Sam Dobbins, was recorded by a fellow police officer who stated the only reason why he recorded this chief because he was so corrupt. He admitted killing African Americans. You know, he said he shot one N-word over 19 times, and he said during his career as a police officer, he killed 13 people. He's bragging and boasting, you know, on this particular video. And he even said to the officer, if you kill somebody, if you murder somebody, just let me know and I'll cover it up. You know, these are some of the instances that African Americans have this experience at the hand of police officers. And another case, our officer Rose Valentino from Cincinnati, a Cincinnati police officer, driving a vehicle near a school where Black parents had parked on both sides of the street because they were picking up their kids. And she was so incensed that she recorded herself calling them niggas and saying how much she hated the N-words. And she said, hate effing niggas. And when you hear the tone of her voice, you can pick up the hatred in her voice. She said how she hates you know, the F word and then the N word. And this is a police officer in uniform. And, you know, thus far, it's only limited to desk duty, but clearly these are two individuals. And fortunately, the police chief, Sam Dobbins, was removed from office. Hopefully, Rose Valentino will be removed from office, because anyone who can articulate such hatred for any group of people that they have a responsibility for protecting and patrolling doesn't deserve to be given much power. As stated, she recorded herself. You know, they picked it up on her camcorder, her articulating such hatred for African Americans, and you know, but she deserves to be terminated. And we're going to keep up on the story to see if she's ultimately terminated. But you know, on Community Cop, we cover so many stories of police abuse, of police officials saying we only murder African Americans. So, you know, in 2022, no one should be able to trivialize complaints of African Americans when they say they're police officers, that police officers times have hard to outright murder members of the African American community. We had officers even acknowledge that on tape, that they can't wait, to kill members of the African American community. But this is just a sad state of affairs. African Americans are subjected to individuals who ride around in our community with such power and authority, granted by the state, but it holds utter hatred for members of the African American community.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the Cincinnati police officer, if she keeps her job, even though right now she's on desk duty.
Right.
If she can keep her job after illustrating all of this racial venom, and that she hates effing, as she called it, niggas, and for her to say that and to be taped doing that, if she keeps her job, then what is that message being sent to all of us? If she can go on patrol with the authority of the state and have the power of life and death, the power of arrest, the power to ill affect someone's future, they can be locked up, will cost them going to college, from getting a civil service job, will cost them their future, their family in some situations, if you're locked up. So to give her that authority after her expressing her true feelings for Black people, it'll be interesting what message is being sent, because it's easy to most chiefs have a petition already. I mean, pension, pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a pension, you locked in. So when they ask you to step down, you step down, but in that process, you might, before you step down, appoint your people who you want to continue your legacy. You put them in position, they're probably in position already. So it's not it's not going to be harmful to a chief to step down. But this officer that's on patrol, she might be in her 8th year, 10th, 13th year. Stop her right now from going on patrol. Take her job, fire her, so she cannot get another job in law enforcement. That's what needs to happen. Let's see what they do.
Right, and as you perfectly, thank you for your comments, Mike. And as you perfectly stated regarding Chief Sam Dobbins, he was involved in 13 incidents where he killed individuals. Less than 1% of all police officers ever get involved in an incident where they actually kill somebody. Less than 1%. He has 13 incidents where he killed somebody. To me, that was a red flag, should have been raised. But so many jurisdictions, be it mayors, be it governors, be it prosecutors, are complicit and co-conspire with these police agencies when you have a ruffian who clearly has issues. So both Chief Dobson has issues and Officer Rose Valentino, when you listen to the video and she articulates a hatred for African Americans, these individuals walk around our community with a gun in the shield, and they definitely, clearly has issues. And this not, by the way, wasn't her first incident. But as you say, we'll see.
Well, if his nightstick can talk, how many heads has he split? If he killed 13, if he murdered 13 Black people, how many heads has he split?
Right.
In his long career?
Right. And
I wish his baton, a nightstick, could testify in court and really expose what he's really about.
Okay, good point. All right, Mike, in Las Vegas, there was a police department that condemned a Black judge. I think her name is Erica Balu. She was recently criticized by the Los Angeles Police Department. Why don't you tell our Community Cop family why?
Yes, the exact name is the Las Vegas Police Protective Association. That's their union.
Okay.
The Las Vegas Police Protective Association. They're condemning a judge who, during a hearing, was counseling a young Black man. Now, her words were direct and to the point of a person that cared. It did not ill affect her sentencing, but this is what she said to him. She said, "You are a Black man in America. you know you don't want to be where cops are. I know I don't, and I know I'm a middle-aged, middle-class Black woman. I don't want to be around where cops are because I don't know if I'm going to walk away alive or not. Those were her exact words. So this was a form of counseling. Now, whether that police union knows it or not, this is something that every Black parent, that conversation they have to have with the Black child, as is commonly called, the talk. You have to have the talk. At 12, 13, 14, you're in that danger zone. You playing beat the clock now. You better brief, especially a young man, on how to comport himself around police officers. She was doing that to this young man in a courtroom, saying you know better. And if you don't know better, I'm telling you now. So that was the talk. And they went after her for that, saying that she violated the Nevada Code of Judicial Conduct because she's saying the rule says at all times to conduct yourself in a way that ensures the greatest possible public confidence and their independence, impartiality, integrity, and confidence. Now, if she had said something favorable about police officers, I don't think they would bring up that code of conduct of impartiality. But since she raised the question to a young man that perhaps his parents might not have said, now they bringing up judicial conduct. Your thoughts?
Well, Michael, I mean, on this particular program, as in past programs, we talked about the mentality of many police officers. We talked about on this program, Chief Sam Dobbins bragging about killing 13 individuals in his career, saying that he shot one N-word, nigger, 119 times. He boasted about it. We talked about Rose Valentino, who said that she hates effing N-words. We talked about the lieutenant who says, yo, listen, when he stopped the white woman, he said, listen, we don't kill white people, we kill Black people. We murder Black people. So for a judge to articulate the experiences that African-Americans went through, continue to go through, and evidently are going to go through in the future as it relates to police officers, for them to simply dismiss the realities that African-Americans experience just shows, a side of their arrogance and ignorance. Because after all, these are the individuals who are doing and saying some of these things. So the judge was just articulating the experiences of many African-Americans. I don't care if you're a judge or I don't care if you're a homeless person. The relationship between the African-American community and white police officers predominantly is hostile, disrespectful, abusive, and racist. So to ignore those realities with all these stories that we come forward with each week, and they keep on rolling, even when police officers have cameras, they continue to happen. To act as if this is not a reality that African-American experience just shows the racist intolerance and ignorance that these white police officers have. And when you talk about Black parents having to have that talk, we talked about that in Community Cop, how in the 30s and 20s, how when Northern parents used to send their kids down south to visit their relatives or their grandparents, they used to have that talk. Listen, you're going down to Mississippi, you're going down to Georgia. There's certain things you can't do. There's certain places you can't go. There's certain things you can't say.
That's right.
In 2022, parents all across the nation have the talk, but now this is in regards to dealing with police officers, dealing with racist police officers. And I think it's preposterous that in 2022, Black parents still have to have that talk with their kids, as it relates to whenever they are confronted by predominantly white police officers. So kudos to the judge.
No doubt. And her response to their allegations, because they're calling for her to lose her judgeship, is she said she supports positive law enforcement. Her words were basically that she supports I support proper law enforcement. In other words, she's not anti-law enforcement. She was just telling the young man, giving him a history lesson that that we all need to, especially young Black men, need to know. You don't want to find yourself in that type of encirclement, because many times it won't turn out well for you, and you don't know if you're going to make it through that experience. So avoid these types of situations at all costs. Now, they didn't go after her in terms of her sentencing or anything else, just for sharing the words of not being caught in the encirclement of police officers.
It is preposterous that she would even have to justify a comment by saying that she, supports good police officers, because all of us do. But the problem with white officers and many unions is they're in total denial about the large percentage of Black police officers, the large percentage of racist police officers, the large percentage of abusive police officers that exist within many of these departments around the country. They act as if these incidents don't exist. So as you said, Michael, kudos to our sister, and all of us support good police officers, but we criticize against abusive and disrespectful and murderous and criminal police officers.
Yes, sir.
But so I want to talk to as well. There's over 100 faith leaders around the country who recently wrote an open letter calling for Brother Mutulu Shakur to be let go from jail. He's a Black Panther that was spent many years in jail. Why don't you update our family about this particular story?
Yes, hundreds of faith leaders from all over the country, representing rather large congregations. They're calling for many actors, whether it was Danny Glover, many civic organizations. They all came together under the banner of the National Faith Coalition. They're calling on federal officials in an open letter to release Dr. Mutulu Shakur, because of he has, doctors estimated, 6 months to live. His health is bad. He cannot even get out of the bed as we speak right now. He's had 2 bouts with COVID-19. He was tried, for those who might bring up that he was convicted of being involved with the Black Panther Party in the Brinks robbery, where 2 police officers were killed. You have to remember, he was tried during the time of COINTELPRO. He has been in jail approximately, if going back from 86, something like that, to now. So we're talking about the high 30s, close to 40 years. He's been in jail. And with his debilitating health, out of compassion, normally you let a person like that go home. His co-defendant, what's her name, Marilyn Buck, was released 10 or 12 years ago. She died shortly after that, but she was released. In his particular case, Dr. Mutulu Shakur was convicted of conspiracy. In other words, they used the RICO laws to put him in jail. Now, which means that they don't know whether he was there when the Brinks truck was robbed. They don't know whether he was physically a part of Assata Shakur being free from her captivity. But they're claiming he was the mastermind. You know what they do with Arabs all the time. Every time they do a bombing, and which they did one last week, where Biden says he killed, I think, Azari, saying he was a mastermind. Every Arab they kill, they say he was the mastermind of 9/11. Well, they're saying that Dr. Mutulu Shakur was the mastermind of the freeing of Assata Shakur, and he was the mastermind of the Brinks, And when you use RICO, you're saying that everybody from the top to the bottom was involved, and they put conspiracy there. So physically, whether he was there or not, they're saying you was down with it. And that's a tragedy too, for a man to dedicate his life to the freedom and liberation of our people, to use acupuncture to help heroin addicts beat the drug itself through acupuncture. For a man like that has a long history of helping our people and fighting for our people. He's done his time in jail, even if you feel he was guilty of those things. Close to 40 years is enough.
Right.
So even if you believe that he did what they claim that he did, even though that's questionable at best because of the COINTELPRO at that time, it's time to let him go. And that's why these faith leaders, these are not radicals. These are not nationalists, Pan-Africanists. These are not people that believe in armed struggle. These are pastors from all over the country saying enough is enough. He's done enough time in jail. The man is about to die. Let him spend his last few months with family and friends. That's all they're saying. And they wrote the letter, and they wrote the letter to, the letter was written to the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Prisons, as well as the United States Parole Commission.
And Michael, you brought an excellent point when you talk about the COINTELPRO era. Was because of the Freedom of Information Act, many attorneys, many activists have been able to retrieve records that show and prove that many police officers, many police agencies, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had engaged in many illegal practices, many criminal practices in order to entrap or forcibly arrest and even in some instances kill members of the Black Panther Party. Another hypocrisy is when the United States accused Russia or China or any other country of prosecuting political or having political prisoners. Right here in the United States, anybody look over the records of the COINTELPRO era will see that political individuals who had political agendas that the government disagreed with were prosecuted falsely, were entrapped, were set up, were lied on, was killed, by government officials. So when people raise issue or concerns or question the prosecution of our brother, when you look at that particular era of COINTELPRO, there's a lot of justification for it. So we'll keep our family updated. Unfortunately, it's time for us to wrap up. Michael, closing comments?
Yeah, I'll just say, Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own and be yourself. And we got to do better. We got to be better because these times now are getting really, really out of hand. Let's pull together, one to another, brother to brother, sister to sister. Let's do this.
Right. On behalf of Community Cop, we'd like to thank our engineers, Veronica Kidnap, Wood, Sheila Berry. We'd like to thank you, our viewing audience. And there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Marcus Garvey provided us with the game plan. And as far as I'm concerned, my own personal opinion, that's the only solution for African Americans to follow the plan of Marcus Garvey, to adopt a nationalist mentality so we can liberate ourselves. And we don't need all of Black folk. Some folks will get it together later on. All we need is that small percentage, that 5% of Black folks to get together with that mentality and implement the strategy of Marcus Messiah Garvey. See you next week. Peace. Little more, I love you, Kitty Cat, Liddy Lou, Gray's family. Hart, we miss you. See you next Tuesday.